first I want to give just a brief introduction to climate change, the kind of climate change that most of us are familiar with. The notion that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere contributes to general warming of the planet. Much like when you roll up the windows on your car, the long wave radiation is trapped inside your car, and so it warms up in there. So even when the windows were not rolled up, your car's sitting out on a sunny day, it's in the parking lot, you got the windows rolled down, all this radiation is coming in, but the long wave radiation is allowed to escape because you got the windows rolled down. And you go out in your car and it's the same temperature inside as out. But then you roll up the windows, you start driving down the road, it gets warm in a hurry because the long wave radiation now is trapped in there because you got the windows rolled up in what you used to think of as a car, but from now on you're going to think of as a greenhouse on wheels, because that's really what it is. Well, as it turns out, Earth is a big greenhouse too, because there are gases in our atmosphere that trap some of that long wave radiation, and it's a good thing, because if they didn't, we wouldn't have a habitable planet. So it's a good thing we've had carbon dioxide in the atmosphere trapping some of that heat and holding it in like a blanket. However, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we have, through the burning of fossil fuels, increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by a little more than 40%. And so that's like putting blankets on. And as a consequence, a bunch of the heat is trapped. A bunch of the long wave radiation can no longer escape. So we have this big greenhouse. And that has contributed to about nearly a 1 degree centigrade temperature rise since 1750. It sounds like almost nothing. It's actually 0.85 degrees centigrade. So at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the planet was about 14 degrees centigrade, about 55 degrees Fahrenheit, global average. Then we started kicking up a bunch of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, started trapping some of that long wave radiation, heating up the planet ever so gradually, and now we're at 0.85, almost 15 degrees centigrade, about 56.5 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't sound like much, but you know how you feel when your body temperature is 98.6 as opposed to 100, or more than a little bit more than 100. You have this low-grade fever. You don't have the energy you used to have. You can't run, you can't jump, you can't play, you can't even focus, you can't concentrate very well. So even a 1.5 degree Fahrenheit temperature rise for your body causes some serious slowing down, some debilitation. You're not able to function like you once were. And the same thing applies to the planet. So no longer can the ecosystems perform the way they used to, because species are under significant stress. Climate change is happening already at 10,000 times the rate of evolution. Evolution by natural selection. So the plants and the animals can't keep up with the rate of climate change. So we've observed a little bit of change so far, but now we're in the arena that most climate scientists won't talk about. We're in the arena of abrupt climate change. Abrupt climate change has happened many times in the deep past, and now it's pretty evident that it's underway here, now. This is a whole nother animal, by the way, compared to linear change. With linear change, that's what evolution sets us up for. We can understand linear change. Linear change means that the near future is going to be like the recent past. Evolution by natural selection sets us up to deal with changes like that. But exponential change is you walk by the pond one day and you notice that there's a little algae in there. And you don't think anything of it, and then the amount of algae doubles every day, and so you walk by 3 days later and holy cow, a quarter of the pond is covered with algae, and that seems like a lot. And maybe in the next few days when you get time you should call somebody about that, because it's going to choke off the oxygen in the pond. We get much more algae in there. There's a quarter full, it doubles every day. So the next day it's half full, and then the next day it's full, and the guy you were going to call to fix that didn't show up. Now we're talking about exponential change. Now we're talking about runaway. Now we're talking about irreversible phenomena. And obviously our evolution by natural selection doesn't set us up for that. We're unaccustomed to those kinds of changes in our habitat in very short periods of time. So I want to start with a little video clip that tells the whole story of abrupt climate change in about 45 seconds. When I was in graduate school a long time ago, I was studying plant ecology and specifically recruitment events for woody plants. And it became pretty obvious that historical changes in climate were influencing current ecosystem function. And I put that aside for a while and pursued the conventional path of chasing after money. So I went from my graduate work to a postdoc to a first academic job, which is a 100% teaching position, and then landed a tenure track position at the University of Arizona at the age of 29. And I was there for 20 years. And for the last 10 years or so, my efforts really focused on social criticism. And so they focused pretty tightly on the lunacy that is contemporary culture and our entrapment within it. And after a while, I'd been pointing out the costs and consequences of imperialism, of the way we live, and what it actually takes to get cheap food on our plates at the restaurant, what it actually costs to get water flowing through the taps, what it actually costs to get gasoline at the service station, and so on. And it became so much that I couldn't bear it anymore. I came to recognize the university as a small part of an irredeemably, fundamentally corrupt system. And so 20 years to the day after I started, I left and created a homestead in southern New Mexico. And so at the age of 49, I walked away from that horrific set of living conditions. And so now I live off grid. My wife and I share 2.7 acres with another couple and their young son, who we'll just call the 11-year-old in charge. And I'd been studying climate change. I published a book that I edited with a colleague. We were editing it in 2002, so that's 12 years ago. And it occurred to me that we had already triggered events that would cause our own demise. That climate change was accelerating to the point that it was on track to remove habitat for all humans on the planet, and not in the long distant future. And since moving to the homestead 5.5 years ago, I have increased my efforts to study climate change and other aspects of this irredeemably corrupt culture that we live in. And most recently, I have returned to the place I found myself in 2002, that we're headed for our own demise and not long from now. So I've been speaking about this for a while, and I operate in a gift economy. I haven't made any money for about 6 years now, so I don't have a lot of money left anymore. So I depend upon the kindness of my hosts to get me to go on speaking tours. Well, Peter in April was looking on YouTube and trying to figure out what's going on with Fukushima. And there on the right-hand side on YouTube, there's that bar of related topics. And he sees stuff on abrupt climate change, and he goes, you know, I haven't really studied that since Al Gore's movie in 2007, so maybe I should check in on that. So he started following that, and then pretty soon there's one on there on the right-hand panel that says Guy McPheson, Earth Extinction 2030 or something like that. And he goes, whoa, and he looks at that, and pretty soon he's so far deep in the rabbit hole, I'm surprised he ever came back out. And then he goes, well, I wonder, this guy has a website apparently, so he goes to guymcpherson.com and he finds out that I'll be speaking in his area just 20 miles from his house 2 weeks from now. So he sent me a message on Facebook, friended me on Facebook. Next thing you know, I'm coming to his town. I got a couple of days free. He creates a couple of events. In a past life, he was an events coordinator, still is an events coordinator, and a sports broadcaster as well. So perfect combination for somebody who is interested in my work and wants to manage and promote these tours. So this is my third tour with Peter, and the last one we did almost 30 events in 12 or 13 days. So Peter's keeping me busy, which I really appreciate. So I've been studying climate change for about 30 years now. I've published several referee journal articles on the topic, published that one edited book on the topic, and I ended up here at the end, I guess, of this relatively short tour. So that gets us up to date. That little video clip illustrates to us what we've all known since we were 10, that birth is lethal and we don't live long. And even if you live to be 100, it's not long. You know, in the end, what you have are a few memories as you exit the planetary stage. Well, the same is true for us as a species as well. We don't have long as a species either. No species last forever. 99.9% of the species to ever exist on the planet are extinct now. All species go extinct. Of course, we think we're special, and we are. All life is special. All species are special. And we're just as special as any other species, which means we get to go extinct too. So our individual lives are short. As a species, the time is short. In fact, if I stretch my arms out like this, and this represents the span, say, of the universe, then the human existence is the last few cells at the end of my index finger. That's how long we've been around. Yeah, we're special, all right. We just showed up. We just showed up and we think it's all about us. And for us, of course, it is all about us. Looks like we missed the boat, by the way. For the entire history of astrophysics, astrophysicists assumed that Earth was right in the middle of the habitable zone. Given a sun with the characteristics of our sun, we thought we'd be right in the middle of that green zone. But if you look up there on the upper right, you see Mars is right there on the outer edge of the habitable zone. Earth is on the inner edge of the habitable zone. And Venus is about as far in from Earth as Mars is out from Earth. So Venus is the yellow cross. And we know what happened to Venus, right? It went Venus. We're right at the inner edge of the habitable zone. So it could be with minor changes in atmospheric chemistry, we could create conditions that would make Earth no longer habitable by our species. And the bad news is we haven't made minor changes in atmospheric chemistry of this planet. We've made major changes to the atmospheric chemistry of this planet. Carbon dioxide has increased just over 40% in the atmosphere since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, from about 280 parts per million to 400 parts per million. And methane has increased 250% since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Methane is, in the short term, more than 100 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So every molecule of CH4 in the short term is 100 times more powerful than every molecule of CO2. Contrary to the contrarian myth that global warming paused starting in 1997, global warming has not paused. It's just that we finally figured out where the heat was going, and it wasn't on land. Land surface records indicated a relative pause, a plateau of temperature, but the ocean occupies, what, 2/3 or 3/4 of the surface area of the Earth? So why did we not look there? Geez, it seems so obvious in retrospect. We should have thermometers in the ocean all the time, but we don't live in the ocean. So nobody really thought to stick thermometers and sensors out there. Well, now we know better. And you see, starting in 1997, right here, that's when heating went exponential, down 700 meters, which is pretty deep in the ocean. And even down to 2,000 meters, 2 kilometers, over a mile deep, things have picked up considerably. It's really, really hard to heat water that deep. But we've managed. So, mainstream climate scientists, people who talk about climate science, and politicians, and most members of the media, end always by pointing out the things we can do to turn this ship around. The ship has hit the iceberg. The hull is cracked. Water is pouring in. We forgot to load the lifeboats. And most people who talk about climate science will tell you that if we just change our light bulbs, we'll be fine. My approach is different. You've heard the asteroid analogy, I'm sure. If there's an asteroid coming to the planet and astronomers know that there's an asteroid coming to the planet, so the government knows, the corporate media knows that there's an asteroid coming to the planet, and we know actually exactly when it's going to strike the planet. Who wants to know? Who wants to know that the asteroid is coming and it's going to hit the planet? Know exactly when. I want to be there. When that thing hits, I want to be staring it right in the eye. So who doesn't want to know? I mean, there are people who just want to go on about their lives, right? I don't want to know about no stinking asteroid. I got to go to work tomorrow. If you don't want to know about the asteroid, you might want to leave now. Because it turns out the asteroid is headed our way, and as Pogo said, we have met the asteroid and he is us. Or something like that. So we've had no humans on the Earth at 3.5 degrees centigrade above baseline meaning the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, about 1750. So 3.5 C is 3 times 1.8. No, I can do this. 5.4 plus a half, 0.9. So that's about 4.5 degrees, a little less than 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit temperature increase. So we've never had humans at 3.5 degrees centigrade, 4 or 5 degrees above Fahrenheit, above where we were at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution when it was 14 degrees centigrade or about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. We're headed for more than 4C above baseline in the relatively near future. And as Oliver Tickell pointed out in an article, a newspaper article, admittedly more than 6 years ago, on Planet 4C, hotter all we can prepare for is extinction. That 4C figure has been based and forecast with respect only to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So nobody is really taking seriously methane in terms of government agencies or even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. In the IPCC's vaunted 5th assessment, which came out officially this year, it was leaked starting in September of last year, they mention methane in a single table. And they conclude that there is very, very little chance it's going to have any impact on us for a long, long time. Bear in mind that the IPCC uses only refereed journal literature. It's among the most conservative scientific bodies on the planet. They have to reach consensus. They're relying on information that is 7 to 10 years old. By the time it comes out, it's ancient news. It relies upon consensus amongst the scientists in each working group, which means that if one person says, "Nah, I don't think methane matters," then methane doesn't matter. And then, after it gets through scientific review, it has to pass political review before it's released to the public. And I don't know about you, but it doesn't seem to me that politicians have our best interests in mind all the time. And by all the time, I mean never. So it looks like we're headed for 4 degrees centigrade based only on atmospheric carbon dioxide. And among the organizations that reach this conclusion, of 4C within a few decades, based only on carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, are the most conservative scientific body on the planet, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The International Energy Agency, the Pentagon, not exactly run by a bunch of left-wing wackos like you and me, PricewaterhouseCoopers, the big investment organization, and the World Bank. These are very conservative organizations. They conclude we're headed for 4C above baseline within a few decades, based only on carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, ignoring the methane threat. United Nations Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases pointed out in a report more than 24 years old, beyond 1 degree C, that means above baseline, that may elicit rapid, unpredictable, and nonlinear responses that could lead to extensive ecosystem damage. Two important points here. Rapid, unpredictable, and nonlinear, so we're not talking about a linear world anymore, the kind of world to which we are accustomed to dealing, that evolution has set us up for. So now we're talking about a completely different animal. We're talking about exponential or nonlinear change. That's the first important point in this one sentence. The second important point is extensive ecosystem damage. It's not that we aren't clever. It's not that we aren't incredibly resilient in dealing with temperature rise. It's way more than 1C warmer inside than it is outside. Still feels plenty cool to me, but that might be my desert blood. You experience every single day a 10 or 20 C temperature rise going in and outside this time of the year. That's not the point. We're clever, we have clothes, we have air conditioning, we have shade, we drink water, we know how to regulate our body temperature. The point is that other organisms are not so swift about it. The point is that evolution is proceeding at 1/10,000th the rate of climate change already. So plants can't keep up. And without plants, we're going to have a hard time finding enough to eat, since everything we eat is based on plants, is either plants or is based on plants. Well, then just last month, David Spratt, in a presentation you can find online, a video presentation titled Dangerous Climate Change, concludes, we thought at 0.8 of a degree was already probably too high, and already my inner grammar teacher is just screaming at this guy. Like, okay, I'm going to be fine. We thought at 0.8 of a degree was already probably too high, and what was safe was probably under half a degree of warming. That's under half a degree centigrade. Less than half a degree centigrade is probably what was safe. Ooh, 24 years late, the incredibly conservative projection pointed out by the United Nations Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases is proven wrong. Well, of course, it's a conservative assessment. It's a conservative process. And even at 0.85 C, we've triggered more than 36 self-reinforcing feedback loops or tipping points. So yeah, 0.5 looks like a lot better target. We should have stuck to that. Mistakes have been made. And finally, a few decades too late, the climate science community caught up. Tim Garrett is a climate scientist at the University of Utah. In a paper written more than 7 years ago, he concludes that only complete collapse of civilization prevents runaway climate change. That's because civilization is a heat engine. Civilization maintained in any form is a heat engine. The response of every academic climate scientist I know is we need to tinker with civilization. We need to reform the system. We need to change the system from the inside. But like the cockroach in the belly of the chicken, by the time you get around to trying to change the system from the inside, you're already in the belly of the chicken. The chicken is the inside. So we're trying to use a heat engine to counteract the effects of the heat engine. That seems a little counterintuitive to me. Maybe it's just me. Apparently it's just me, because no other climate scientist will mention that we can use collapse of industrial civilization to try to do something. Well, since Garrett's paper has come out, we have discovered that collapse of civilization, even a relatively minor reduction in sulfates going into the atmosphere from burning coal, even a 35% reduction causes runaway greenhouse because of the solar dimming associated with those sulfates. And this became obvious on September 14th, 2001, when 3 days after US planes stopped flying, there was a profound change in the temperature signature of the planet. And it was just US planes that stopped flying. We were still running our coal-fired power plants, and planes around the rest of the world were still going, and yet there was a profound change in the temperature signal of the planet. So if we stop, and this is pretty fascinating, Michael Mann is one of the top 2 climate scientists in the world, he and James Hansen. Michael Mann at Penn State University was interviewed by Tom Hartman on his television show last week. And Michael Mann, in April of this year, said some things that were not based in current scientific understanding. And I pointed those out to Tom Hartman and him in an email exchange. And so he finally at that point said, okay, I agree, 2C is baked into the cake. We can't use that as the target anymore. So a few weeks after that April interview, he started saying that, well, we missed that exit. We missed 2C as an exit, and 2C is catastrophic. It's been a political target, but it hasn't been a scientific target for 24 years. He says, okay, we missed that exit ramp, but we got to take the next one. In his interview last week, he changed his mind about that. He's back to saying we need to stop at 2C, and along the way, we have to keep the coal-fired power plants all going because they're providing solar dimming. So this is one of the premier climate scientists in the world saying we need to burn coal. It's almost as if he thinks the whole set of living arrangement is about relatively wealthy white men, or even people. Maybe it's not just about us. Civilization is a heat engine. You can't change it from the inside, because the inside is civilized. Finally, Truth Out, doing an assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's vaunted 5th assessment, headlines their article, Intergovernmental Climate Report Leaves Hopes Hanging on Fantasy Technology. And specifically what the IPCC says in their 5th assessment is global warming is irreversible without massive geoengineering of the atmosphere's chemistry. Irreversible. First time they've admitted this, and this is based on 7 to 10-year-old information. It's the most conservative scientific body on the planet, and climate change is irreversible without relying upon fantasy technology. They didn't suggest what kind of geoengineering we might propose, but subsequently 5 refereed journal articles have come out pointing out that geoengineering is probably pretty stupid. The bottom line is the bottom line here from Nature Communications in February of this year. Current schemes are likely to either be relatively useless or actually make matters worse. The most commonly proposed idea behind geoengineering is to put reflective particles into the stratosphere. This is sometimes called solar radiation management. And Environmental Research Letters from January attempts to reverse the impacts of global warming by injecting reflective particles into the stratosphere could make matters worse. And then 6 weeks later, in the same journal, risk of abrupt and dangerous warming is inherent to the large-scale implementation of SRM, solar radiation management. So the fantasy technology, it seems, isn't likely to work. Global warming is irreversible without massive geoengineering of the atmosphere's chemistry, and geoengineering the atmosphere's chemistry is a prescription for utter disaster. It appears that we're damned if we do and damned if we don't. So far, the conversation has been only about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, because so far climate scientists have largely ignored the other threats from the handful of other greenhouse gases listed here in order of their, not only their power, increasing power, but decreasing abundance in the atmosphere. So I mentioned that methane is measured in parts per billion as opposed to carbon dioxide, which is measured in parts per million, orders of magnitude difference. And I also mentioned that methane is 100 times more powerful, more than 100 times more powerful, a greenhouse gas molecule for molecule, than is carbon dioxide. So They get more powerful as we go down the list. They also become less abundant in the atmosphere as we go down the list. I'm going to focus on methane from a single source, that coming out of the Arctic Ocean, because that's the one that has been most heavily documented in the scientific community. First appeared that it had hit runaway stage in August of 2009 in the refereed journal literature, and Science got on board shortly thereafter. The paper in Science points out that Arctic Ocean methane is equivalent to 1,000 to 10,000 gigatons or million tons of carbon, relative to, at the time, we had burned 226 gigatons of carbon by burning fossil fuels. Now we're up over 300. But still, the amount of methane in the Arctic Ocean alone, in the relatively shallow continental shelf of the Arctic Ocean alone, is 3 to 30 times the carbon equivalent as we burned so far by burning fossil fuels. And we're at 0.85.
Methane hydrates, that's like frozen methane?
Yeah, methane hydrates or clathrates are chemical cages. The hydrated clathrate is a chemical cage around a methane molecule, CH4 molecule. And as it warms, the cage breaks open and the methane is released into the water column or into the air. And now we've been studying methane for a while, so we're starting to see things like a minor increase in temperature is sufficient to trigger methane release. Finally, the refereed journal literature catches up in a paper by Michael Jennings in Global Policy. Sure enough, it seems that we have engaged self-reinforcing or amplifying feedback mechanisms. According to Natalia Shukova, who has been conducting observations of methane release from the Arctic Ocean for the last 10 years, a 50 gigaton burp of methane is, quote, highly possible at any time. Highly possible at any time. That sounds problematic to me. And finally, NASA's CARVE project observed methane plumes up to 150 kilometers across in the Arctic Ocean summer before last. This is huge. So imagine it's a calm day, you're in a sailing ship, you're out in the Arctic Ocean, and as far as you can see in every direction, the ocean is bubbling. It looks like carbonated water. It looks like ginger ale. That's a methane plume 150 kilometers across, as far as you can see in every direction. That's a lot of methane. That's not like, ooh, a little bubble over there. Did you see that? Like a fish jumping, right? Go out with my wife. Did you see that fish jump? No, where? She looks over there. Over there, right behind. No, over there. This methane is everywhere. Everybody sees these fish jumping.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, you just did. That was your one. I'm sorry. Everybody gets a turn.
Methane produced by decomposing organic matter. Usually, the most common thing is poop, cow poop. Is it organic? Why? I don't understand the dynamics of why it's happening now as a result of. Is it because the ice sheets are melting and exposing it, or what is that dynamic?
So why is it warmed up enough to release the methane from the Arctic Ocean?
Well, I know the temperature is rising, and so is it a result of the melting of the ice cap that's really
it's myriad factors all at the same time. Something is causing the warming of the Arctic Ocean, and the many contributors include a reduced polar ice cap in the Arctic, and so there's less reflectance and more absorption. There's also warm Atlantic water, which as part of the thermohaline conveyor belt or the Gulf Stream, typically reverses course when it gets to northern Europe. And so that warm Atlantic water reverses course when it gets off of the coast of Europe and Greenland and comes south. And instead, starting a few years ago, it began shooting through the Fram Strait off the north and east coasts of Greenland and going right into the Arctic. So now we've got warm Atlantic water going right into the Arctic. And it's a self-reinforcing feedback loop. The more methane that's released, the warmer it gets, initially locally. And the warmer it gets, the more methane is released. So, and as indicated in that paper in Geophysical Research Letters in June of 2010, a minor increase in temperature is sufficient to trigger methane release. Well, remember the slide I showed early on about where all that heat was going and how it had accelerated since 1997? We're warming even the very deep ocean. Methane clathrates and subsea permafrost are found just a few hundred meters below the surface of the ocean. And we're warming significantly down 700 meters. So it doesn't take much to warm those hydrates enough to cause them to bubble up and release the methane. Storms accelerate the methane release by mixing the water and getting that warm water down deeper. And it becomes increasingly obvious that things have gone exponential when you consider that in the East Siberian Arctic shelf, the venting of methane into the atmosphere increases from 0.5 teragrams to 17 teragrams in 7 years. So a couple orders of magnitude increase in a very short period of time. And based on this single self-reinforcing feedback loop alone, Sam Carana concludes we're headed for really warm temperatures in the very near future. A little bit more about that later. And Malcolm Light concludes similarly that the Gulf Stream or thermohaline conveyor belt, that transport rate, started the clathrate gun firing in 2007 when the energy was more than sufficient. And that's because of a combination of factors. Less ice cover, therefore more open blue water absorbing the heat, the warm Atlantic water shooting up through the Fram Strait, the storms that are getting the mixing, the increased temperature of the water everywhere, the ice going away, you know, a million different things, all of them bad news. I need to point out here that if I'm citing a referee journal article, I'll give the name and the date for the journal article. If I'm citing something that is not peer-reviewed, it just includes the name of the person. Sam Carana, Malcolm Light. Both of these are written at a website called Arctic News. So these are not referee journal articles that we're relying upon for this information. But this is very reliable information about atmospheric methane levels at the level of the globe. And you can see in 1750, we're down around 700, just over 700 parts per billion, and now we're up over 1,850 parts per billion in the atmosphere. And a lot of that change has come just within the last few decades. Things have gone exponential with respect to methane release. That said, you look up around late 90s, early 2000s, it looks like there's a plateau there. That atmospheric methane has plateaued, and then starting in about 2007, according to Malcolm Light's analysis at Arctic News, it is again gone exponential. So here we are in 1999 to 2005, very little change, linear increase in atmospheric methane at the global level. And then things get really interesting, and the data points here are from the incredibly conservative Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, from NOAA, from the World Meteorological Organization, and so on. So these are quite reliable sources. And so here's the plus 4C by 2030, plus 10C by 2040, pointed out by Sam Carana, and that's shown with this pink line on the left, the one labeled number 2, and fitting an exponential curve and projecting into the future. Longtime professor and then professor emeritus at Colorado University, Albert Bartlett, said thousands of times he gave a very, very similar presentation. And in that presentation he said, this is his signature line, the greatest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand the exponential function. And again, that goes back to our evolutionary history. We think linearly, we're linear organisms. Change has always been slow, it's always been gradual. Since we came down from the trees, since we got into the cave and came out of the cave. But that's not the world we're living in today. I disagree, by the way, no offense to the dead. But I think the greatest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand. Period. To understand and to empathize with other human beings. For starters, always calling them other. To understand and to empathize with non-human species. We think it's all about us. The whole show is all about us. So, yeah, we don't understand the exponential function too, but I think really the problem is that we don't understand. It's hard to understand. Climate scientist Paul Beckwith at the University of Ottawa a couple of years ago pointed out that based on his understanding of deep time and events in deep time, we could experience a 6°C rise in global average temperature within a decade. But in any event, I don't see any situation that would allow plant life capable of supporting human life at 6°C above baseline. Among the kinds of events that Beckwith studies are an event 55 million years ago triggered by methane release from the Siberian traps, in which the ocean surface turned acidic over a period of weeks or months, and there was a 5°C temperature rise in 13 years, following a major methane release in the Siberian traps. So there have been very rapid changes in global average temperature in the past attributable to methane. This was the most recent great extinction event. It was 55 million years ago. And it was associated with methane release over a short period of time. That's just one of 40 irreversible self-reinforcing feedback loops that I know about. And I'm not the only crazy person on the planet who thinks that lack of habitat will lead to absence of humans in the relatively near term. Among those on the list are a couple of biologists, Frank Fenner and Neil Dawes from Australia and Canada, respectively, Louise Leakey, the anthropologist, and her father, Richard Leakey, Sir Bob Geldof, the public figure, Noam Chomsky, the philosopher and linguist, who believes that we're headed for human extinction in the near term as a result of climate change. And even IT manager Jennifer Hines concluded in August of this year that we're headed for near-term human extinction. I asked her on my radio show when, what day, what's my expiration date? She was evasive about that. I learned from her, I'll be evasive too. So we get to this point and it looks bad. And almost every other person who speaks on the topic would tell you to go buy a Prius and we'd be fine. And to that notion, I invoke Farley Mowat. We're under some gross misconception that we're a good species going somewhere important and that at the last minute we'll correct our errors and God will smile on us. It's delusion. We're delusional. If we go the path of Tim Garrett, and civilization falls, well, because of the absence of global dimming, we go up over 2°C in a matter of days, and that's going to trigger even more self-reinforcing. That's been a political target since Kyoto, has been 2°C. Well, it's done. It's baked into the cake. It's history. Even if we stop everything right now, turn off all the lights, not just Earth hour, but Earth ever, turn off all the lights and all the cars forever, boom, immediately we're hyperheating the planet. And 2 means 6 in the relatively short term. The last time we had 6-degree warmer planet, there were snakes the size of yellow school buses living in the Amazon. The largest mammal was the size of a shrew. That's the largest mammal that can thermoregulate those kind of wet bulb temperatures. I'm not an optimist. I don't know if that's been clear. But I don't think of myself as a pessimist either. In fact, I tend to think of myself as a realist. Yes, I think it's really quite bad. If you can't laugh at yourself and you can't laugh at the apocalypse, you got some pretty dark days ahead. If you can laugh at yourself and you can laugh at the apocalypse, you're never going to run out of material. I want to finish like a Hollywood movie. How could I not? With really good news. And there is really good news. There's stunningly good news. You get to die. Something you've known since you were 10 years old. I'm just here to remind you of that. We get to die. DNA ensures our unique status. We know a lot about DNA. We know enough about DNA at this point to know that DNA coming together in this collection, in bodily form, in physical form, the odds against that happening are truly cosmological. The odds of any one of us being here ever exceed the odds against plucking a single atom from the entire universe at random. And yet, here we are, against those odds. That's astonishing. As evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins says, in the teeth of these stupefying odds, it is you and I that are privileged to be here, privileged with eyes to see where we are, and brains to wonder why. We get to be here. We get to be here now. We get to be here at the most exciting, most interesting time in human history. Everybody else left the movie before it was over. We get to be here until the end. Isn't that awesome? It's amazing. And I'll bet when we die, we are not lying there on our deathbed doing this. I should have bought more crap. For 7 more pairs of shoes, I'd have been a happy human being when I died. No, no, no. Even if we live to be 100, we're going to have a few memories before we die. And I hope that we can create memories that are joyful, that are filled with joy. I hope that we can create moments so that when we're on our deathbed, we won't be thinking, I should have bought more crap, or, geez, I was such a horrible human being. I should have spent more time at work making more money. Oh no, no. I should have spent less time at work and more time with those I love. I should have spent more time outdoors in nature, immersed in nature. I'm thinking that's what most people are going to be feeling on their way out the door. Not, I should have bought more crap. But maybe I'm just an optimist. If you want the science, and there's way, way, way more science than I could present here this evening, you don't have to buy either of my latest 2 books. Instead, you can go to this long essay at my website, and for free, you can check every citation I've given you tonight. And a whole bunch more. When I wrote this essay in January of 2013, it was a couple thousand words. Like most essays I write, I just get sort of tired of writing, so I just, 2,000 words is a lot, that's enough to say. And I've been updating it since then, every week or so, and now it's about 15,000 words. There's a lot going on the climate change front, and most of it's pretty bad. So, I want to give us plenty of time to process what I've said tonight and to solicit your response. So, I'm going to stop right there, unless you make me go longer, and encourage questions and comments, and answers would be especially welcome. Yes, all the way in the back.
Have any estimates been made as to how many teratons of methane hydrates are available to vaporize? I.e., how quickly will we be up to our wishes in heat curve? Is it a slow heat curve or is it a hockey stick heat curve?
Well,
I know,
the global average temperature rise as a result of methane, the heating potential of methane is very short term. So when the methane is released, if for example we get the 50 gigaton burst of methane that is, quote, highly possible at any time, the temperature rise associated with that will occur in the very near term. The half-life of methane is a few years. The half-life of carbon dioxide is hundreds of years. So carbon dioxide is incredibly recalcitrant in the atmosphere. Methane is not. It breaks down relatively quickly. But the heating also occurs very quickly. So when the methane is released, heating follows very promptly thereafter. I haven't seen any assessment in the refereed journal literature about, and I have a hard time even tracking down what the radiative forcing is of methane in short, medium, and long term. The IPCC used to say that over a span up to 20 years, the warming potential of methane was 72 times greater than carbon dioxide. Other people not affiliated with the IPCC say more than 100 times. Some people say 350 times. The IPCC more recently says, no, it's not 72 because that's too damn scary. Instead, it's 36. It's half what we said before. Trust us. The IPCC, you know, the referee journal literature in a paper written by James Hansen and colleagues concluded years ago that somewhere between 300 and 350 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was catastrophic. We couldn't go beyond 350, and thus was born 350.org. Going around telling people that we can get to 350 parts per million by mid-century. The heating associated with the current level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will persist for at least 1,000 years, according to a paper in the February issue of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So there's no way we're getting down to 350 by mid-century. In response, the baseline keeps shifting. The dangerous number keeps going up. According to the referee journal literature, it's still 300 to 350. 350 we now know is a death sentence for small island states in sub-Saharan Africa. But in their latest assessment, the IPCC says 450 is the danger mark. Well, if we tack on the carbon dioxide equivalent of methane to carbon dioxide is at 400. Let's use the very conservative figures of the IPCC, 36, a warming potential 36 times. Well, we got 1,800 parts per billion methane in the atmosphere at this point. That takes us up to 460 parts per million equivalent of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And they said 450 was what we needed to really be worried about. I sense next time the part we'll need to worry about is going to be 550, and then 650, and it'll just keep going up. But it was really dangerous a long time ago. 5 million people a year die early deaths due to climate change. 5 million people. We wonder when it's going to matter. If you're in the families of those 5 million, it matters. Sorry, that was such a long-winded answer to such a simple question. I'll try not to do that anymore. Yeah.
So, if I understand things correctly, the way that we got all the fossil fuels that we have is from living organisms decomposing, getting buried underground, etc. So, if it was all in the atmosphere originally, why was it okay then but not now? Because living organisms put on body weight, they decompose, that's what turned into this. So don't we actually have a temporary shortage of carbon in the atmosphere, and now we're putting it back where it should be?
Yeah, it was all okay, as long as we didn't care about habitat for our species. It'll be okay in the future as long as we don't care about habitat for our species.
So our species,
it's been 12 degrees warmer, 12 degrees centigrade warmer than baseline in the past. But there's no way humans survive that. It's okay, just not for us.
right. I see.
So yeah, I mean, there's been profound variation in temperature, global average temperature, and in levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide in the past, and there will be in the future, whether we're along for the ride or not. Yeah.
What are you going to do with the rest of your time?
Well, it depends on how long I have. You know, if I only have till 7:30, I'm going to be here hanging out with you wonderful people. Apparently, and this is an apocryphal story, no doubt, but stories are made up about events 2,600 years ago, and there's nobody to check to see if they're actually accurate. So the Buddha allegedly asked one of his students how frequently he thought about death, and the student says, oh, I think about death all the time, probably 20 times a day. And the Buddha says, that's not enough. You must think about death with every breath. The proverbial wolf is always at the door. The whole point of Extinction Dialogues, a book I have just out with Carolyn Baker, just out this month, is the subtitle. It's all in the subtitle, How to Live with Death in Mind. And we propose living with urgency, living with love, living with compassion, and living with passion. Pursuing what we love with great passion, with great urgency. So, what am I going to do with the rest of the time? I'm going to go back home at some point. Monday? Tuesday? Monday, I think. You know, I can't keep track of what's going on, so I have to look at the coming events tab on Nature Brass Last to see when and where I'm presenting, or rely on my manager, the wonderful Peter Melton. And he knows when and where I'm going to be places. So I'm going to go back home Monday, and I'll probably spend nearly a month there before I have another series of events. People are constantly trying to organize things for me, but it's kind of expensive to get me places because it's airfare. I stay in the homes of my hosts and eat at their table because I find that more interesting than staying in a sterile motel. But it's still expensive, and we're in the age of economic contraction, so that not everybody has a bunch of money lying around, right? So I'll continue to do what I've been doing. And there's a reason for that. People ask me all the time, why are you going around scaring the children? Well, I'm not scaring the children, I'm scaring everybody, so let's not be picky about it. And that's your projection, that's not me. I'm just reminding you that you're going to die, something you've known since you were 10 years old, probably younger. And I'm doing what I do because when I was 6, I was in first grade. And we didn't have kindergarten, so it was my first year of school. And I came home from school after just a couple of weeks, and I took the Dick and Jane primer home with me and showed it to my 4-year-old sister. And I pointed at something in the book and said, "What's that?" And she said, "It's a dog." And I said, "No, it's Spot." I was pissed because she didn't know it was Spot. And then I turned the page and I said, "What's that?" She said, "It's a cat." And I said, "No, it's Puff." See, I'm a teacher. It's not what I do, it's who I am. And so I'll continue to do this for as long as I can.